Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gina Wan. I'm a SMID-cap biotech analyst at the Barclays. It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Jeff Walsh, Chief Financial and Strategy Officer from Bluebird. Let me grab you.
Is the mic live? Yeah. Okay, good. I'm going to do it sitting down because I got in very late last night. I'm kind of tired after a day of one-on-ones here, so if you guys don't mind. But I only have a few slides, and it's really to introduce you to where we are as a company right now. And it's a pretty exciting time for Bluebird as we hopefully are on the cusp of becoming a commercial stage company. And it doesn't mean we're not a development stage. It doesn't mean we're not a research stage, but it's the first entree for Bluebird into this world. So really excited to be here, Gina, and I look forward to getting to some of the questions that I know you have as well, and any that others have. I will be making some forward-looking statements, so please refer to our SEC documents for further information about the risks associated with investing in Bluebird. We came out with a bit of a new branding for the company at JP Morgan this year, and you can see some of it up here, and I'm going to talk just for a minute about what this means to us. But you can see this concept of recoding for life. And what does that mean? Well, we're trying to do things that are different, things that haven't been done in the industry before. Gene therapy on its own is a complete transformation of a new therapeutic paradigm for how to treat severe genetic diseases in oncology. So for a long time, from a research perspective, we've been challenging the system to think differently. From a development perspective, we've been challenging the system to think differently and have been pioneers in things like the Adaptive Pathways program in the EU, which has allowed us to get to the point with our TDT program, RMAT designation for our sickle cell program, and now we're trying to do the same thing in the commercial world. And I'll talk for a second about some of the novel pricing and reimbursement schemes that we anticipate rolling out later this year, hopefully. But it really is about trying to recode for life for the benefit of the patients that we serve. And you see a couple of the faces here that I know quite well. One on the left-hand side of the screen is a young boy named Ethan, who unfortunately did not survive his CLD diagnosis, one of the diseases we're treating. And he is one of those beacons that we live with every day. We can't have any more Ethans in the world dying because of these genetic diseases. And you see a young boy in the middle as well, who we got to know quite well, unfortunately, who also passed away. He was a remarkable young man who loved science and came into Bluebird and lit us on fire on this day you're seeing being clapped out of Bluebird a number of years ago. He's our inspiration, as is Ethan and many others. And it really is personal for us. It gets down to the point where we get to know these boys and patients at a level that we need to know them for the benefit of driving forward with our therapies. So our vision we came out with in the beginning of the year got bolder than last year, in that we now anticipate 4 programs either being filed or approved by 2022. That's a mouthful to say for a company of 800-ish people, but we have the prospect, data obviously dependent, on actually living up to this across the U.S. and EU and launching 4 programs during that period of time. But that's not where we stop. Yes, we might have those programs on the market across these different indications, but we also believe we're building a pipeline behind that. And we anticipate, via this vision, that we would have 5 other clinical programs, and by 2020 have a 1 to 2 IND per year engine cranking. I know this is a bold vision, and we have to live up to that vision, but excited about the prospects of this. And then you think about the opportunity, thinking about those 4 programs across the years that you see on the screen here. It will be a progressive build through different populations of patients. So in beta thalassemia, it's first in the non-beta 0 population, then hopefully in the beta 0 population, then we'll add pediatrics on, again, all predicated on data continuing to look promising, and our interactions with the regulatory authorities. CALD during this period of time hopefully will be a product that's launched, and you can see that in 2021. Our multiple myeloma program with Celgene starting potentially in 2020, and then sickle cell starting in 2022. So the whole purpose of Bluebird right now is to set the system up well for all of these subsets of patients to live on the commercial and manufacturing tracks that we're trying to set up this year and next year in particular for TDT. I've talked somewhat about the pipeline on the left-hand side from our program in thalassemia, sickle cell, CALD, but also our cancer pipeline with the multiple myeloma product that is in collaboration with Celgene, and the multiple lines of therapies that we're pursuing there, as well as a next-generation multiple myeloma program leveraging a CAR-T technology. But on the right side of the slide, you also see something that we don't talk about a lot, but you will see more of over time, and that is all of the tools and technologies we've built as a company over the last really 24 to 36 months that are going to be the basis of a pipeline for the future. And you can see a lot of companies' names in there, partners for success as we're calling them. We tried to find the best of breed of all the different technologies that we thought we needed to win, in particular in this case in oncology, and brought together the capabilities the company has built internally and aligned those to a point where we now feel like our pipeline is starting to emerge. And we won't talk in detail about what the pipeline looks like, but you can see the philosophy that we're taking here, which is this one-to-many strategy, which is taking a first-generation program, leveraging the experience that we get in the clinic and preclinically, and building second, third, fourth-generation products behind that before we even know what the first-generation product is doing. And so all of the tools and technologies I just described are going to be brought to bear on this emerging pipeline. We've done this before. We've got 2121, our multiple myeloma program with Celgene. We have right behind that 2121-7. We developed that program for more persistent T cells even before we saw any data from the 2121 program. We've got other examples of a sickle cell program that's a next generation program that we're excited about. So this has been the way we've operated historically. It's gotten us to this point today, and we're hopeful we'll build a pipeline behind it. So we're gearing up for launch, and all of the reference to the commercial infrastructure I just mentioned is geared toward manufacturing. So you see on the left-hand side the virus manufacturing and drug product, but building a supply chain around that in Europe first and then the U.S., of collecting cells, preparing the cells, shipping them, and receiving the cells across different qualified treatment centers in Europe that is complex and expensive, but it will be a differentiating factor for us, we believe, in the future. We're doing this, obviously, on the basis of pretty strong clinical data, and we've built a field organization that is Blue style, which means we're wrapping around these qualified treatment centers all the support networks and the systems we need to ensure that they're ready for the patient when they walk in the door. And we came out with a value-based approach that is different from others that have approached this before. We want to be fairly recognized for our value, and we came out with a description of what we thought that value was for the thalassemia program at JPM. We also want to share risk. So we're willing to go at risk with the payers such that we get payment over for a one-time therapy. These are all one-time therapies, but payment over a 5-year period of time, with 80% of that being at risk. So equal installments over 5 years. The 4 years after the first payment are at risk. If the patient does not perform the way we expected that patient to perform, as they have in the clinical trials, that payer does not pay. If they do, obviously they pay the full amount of the 5-year payment. We're trying to make sure that there's an affordability component to this by virtue of spreading that over time versus a one-time upfront payment, which has more been the history for these type of therapies. And we're trying to think about the system itself and making it affordable for the system itself. All of this to say that we are in conversations with payers in Europe around this type of a model and getting very good reception to start, but the real work is ahead of us. Once we get approval, hopefully, and announce our price, bringing this to bear along with the price, that's when the real work starts to negotiate and gain access to those markets on a go-forward basis. So here are the catalysts for 2019 for us. You'll see a mix of both research, development, and now commercial milestones and regulatory milestones. So for the TDT program, for Lentiglobin, you will get an update mid-year on the 207 and 212 trials, as well as end of year. We are hopeful that we will have an approval for TDT for the non-beta 0 population in the EU and file in the US by year end. For our sickle cell program, data updates again mid-year and year end around the ongoing trials. For our 21-21 multiple myeloma program with Celgene, starting the next line therapies, the KarMMa-2 and KarMMa-3 and second and third line therapies by mid-year. And then ultimately, by end of year, giving an update on both the KarMMa pivotal trial as well as our historic 401 trial, which is ongoing. And then for our 21-21-7 follow-on program, also a data update. Lastly, we have an Analyst Day planned for May 9th, where we will go through the full spectrum of capabilities of the company, from the research pipeline building all the way to the commercial infrastructure we're trying to set up for thalassemia, CALD, and sickle cell, hopefully to follow. So a whirlwind through kind of where we are as an organization, but may form the basis, I know, of some questions that you possibly want to hit, Gina, in the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That's very helpful overview. And also, I think now it's a very exciting time for Bluebird, and we will see the first product likely will enter the market this year. So maybe I'll start with, the commercial preparation in Europe. And can you give us, you touch upon a little bit, maybe, help us understand, the infrastructure there, the manufacturing, and the sales force.
Sure. Yeah, so it's a big lift. It really is. This has never been done before in Europe in the way that we're doing. There have been gene therapy products that have been approved in Europe, but not this type of a patient population spread across Europe and with a good-sized population of patients in need. So there's a lot to it. So you can break down some of the components. One is just getting manufacturing right. So that's the vector side and the drug product side. The drug product being where the viral vector meets the cells that we collect from the patients, and the viral vector inserts the DNA into the patient's cells, and then ultimately the patient goes back to the hospital for those cells to be returned to him or her, and hopefully they'll home to the bone marrow and then become a source of the expression of proteins that they couldn't produce before because of their genetic abnormality. So the manufacturing component of this is a much bigger deal than any other therapeutic paradigm, because it effectively is the patient cells that are the product in the end, gene modified then. And so a lot of time there on validating our drug product manufacturer in Europe, the vector manufacturing, and getting the system set up basically from a licensure standpoint to be able to receive that first patient if we're so fortunate to have that happen this year. So that's on the manufacturing side. The sites that ultimately are treating these patients, you've got the sites that are collecting the cells, so the apheresis sites, and then you've got the sites that ultimately are transfusing or are putting the cells back into the patient through this bone marrow transplant process we can describe. So getting those sites up and running and qualified, the reason we call them qualified treatment centers, QTCs, is that we have to go through a process to make sure that we and they, in collaboration, are confident in their ability to execute across this full spectrum of patient engagement, from the time we first touch them to the time that they come back and ultimately have the bone marrow transplant and have their own cells reinfused into them. So that is a big part of what our organization is setting up today. We anticipate having 4 QTCs, qualified treatment centers, in Italy, 3 in Germany, and 2 in the UK in and around a potential launch. And then the next big part of this is the payer engagement. So really trying to make sure that the model that I just described is understood by the payers and is one that we, in a collaborative way, are working through such that it meets the needs of Bluebird, of the patients, and of the payers themselves. And this also is something that's new. You really haven't seen, you've seen payment models over time. You've seen some models that are outcomes-based, but very rarely have you seen the combination of the two, particularly with a company going at risk for 80% of the cost. And so you can imagine how those discussions are going, which is they're being received exceptionally well conceptually, but ultimately the heavy lifting, the big work, really happens after we get approval, assuming we get approval, and then we announce a price and we really get into the conversations with the payers on that. But we're having the dialogue today about the model and how to make the model work in the various communities.
Mm-hmm. That's very helpful, and I have several questions on those comments.
Sure.
So the first, maybe, if I understand correctly, the virus manufacturing sites is in the U.S.
Correct.
Are there any logistic to ship over to Europe? And also, are you planning to set up a virus manufacturing facility in Europe?
Yeah, so two questions there. One, we've been running clinical trials on a global basis now for a number of years with sites set up in the U.S. and Europe that have had to deal with the transfer of cells and the vector. And so, obviously, we're entering a commercial world, so there are some things that you have to do that are different, but that's not something that is groundbreaking per se. The movement of cells across countries is something that's been dealt with not only by us, but by others for a while. Getting the licensure set up for a commercial entity, that's a different endeavor, which we're in the throes of right now to make sure that we're ready for that first patient. Sorry, your second question was on?
Are you planning to set up sites in Europe?
So the other part of this is that we have a manufacturing plant of our own in North Carolina, just to set kind of the stage for the manufacturing footprint for the company. And we have at least 5 major CMO contracts that are all strategic in nature and a huge strategic commitment by both parties to provide scale for all of the programs that we're talking about. The drug product manufacturer in Europe is in Germany, and that's through an organization known as ABSATH. But we do have plans to build manufacturing, or not build manufacturing, but have manufacturing capabilities across vector and drug product in both the U.S. and Europe. Exactly how, over time, that will change, but those relationships afford us the opportunity to have vector in both locations and drug product in both locations.
Mm-hmm. And the second question is regarding, initial target countries, and you mentioned a few. Can you give us, estimate patient prevalence in each country for beta thalassemia?
Thalassemia, sure. And a reminder that initially we're launching into the non-beta zero population. Hopefully we'll also launch into the beta zero population, and hopefully we'll launch further into the ped population. All of those populations obviously predicated on data continuing to look good and good engagement with the regulatory authorities. But having said that, let's presume that we're on the other side of those approvals. The population across all of TDT, so all of those genotypes and patient age groups, there are about 15,000 prevalent population in the U.S. and Europe, 6,500 of which are in Italy, and then less than 1,000 in each of Germany, UK, and France. And then the U.S. is, we've seen different numbers for the U.S. The one that most people quote is a CDC number of 1,000 patients, but we think it might be slightly larger than that.
Okay. And then, the other question is about payer discussion, and then this will be very important, I think, for the gene therapy space. And we start to see, I think, Spark made some efforts and tried to change the current, the payer scheme. Mm-hmm. But I think the U.S. will take a longer time, and hopefully, the new, like you guys also can help, move to the next level. So in Europe, so Can you share with us, I know it's still very early days, but can you share with us the feedback from different countries in terms of your proposed, 5 years installment? And the other one, I know you cannot comment on the price, but, is the overall feedback on the price maybe you have in your mind, is there any huge differences among different countries?
Yeah, so I can't answer the last question only because we haven't declared a price, nor have we had conversations with payers about specific price, but maybe I'll answer it in a more general way. Certainly each country is a bit different, and you just look at classic European launches. Germany is first because you have effectively free pricing for the first year, during which time you're negotiating for the ultimate price. So that's why companies typically launch in Germany first or have access to that market first. Because in Europe, it really isn't, the gating factor is not the approval, it's getting reimbursement approval. And so Germany first, which will typically be the case and should be the case for us. And then between the UK, France, and Italy, the Italian market has historically been more amenable to and put in place more of these types of payment over time contracts. So we expect that to be the case going forward as well for us. But again, we're bringing two things together, and so it's a different conversation. And also an area where they have the largest population of thalassemia patients potentially to treat. UK has historically been a little bit more difficult, as we've seen from others that are out there trying to get these severe genetic disease type reimbursement. And then France, as you can see, is more in line with Italy typically in terms of duration of time to get reimbursement approval, which is when you can access those markets. So that's the way we're generally thinking about it. And in terms of reaction to ultimately the pricing scheme that we put out there and the value proposition that we thought TDT brings forward, interesting that when we had our European team that was rightfully so a little trepidatious about putting out a brand new model that also has a value declaration in terms of the value that we think this brings to patients in terms of quality of life and mortality benefit. They were a little worried about how the European markets would react. And I think the general feedback coming back was there wasn't a lot of overreaction to it. They knew that we were thinking about this in a way that was collaborative, that was trying to do the right thing in terms of payment over time and going at risk with the payers. So, but ultimately, it will be determined by the negotiations that we get into with each payer on a country-by-country basis. We were surprised a little surprised that the Germans are really interested in this pay-for-performance model. They historically haven't been ones that have been receptive to it, but we're hearing more openness to that type of a model. So the dialogue's been good and receptive, but we have to see how it plays out now over the ensuing years, assuming we can launch into Germany this year.
Okay, so maybe we switch gear also, talk a little bit about BCMA CAR T program. I think right now we're in the middle of Bristol acquiring Celgene. We don't know if the deal will go through or not. So how do you see that will impact the BB2121 development path? And what will be your plan B if, for whatever reason, Bristol decided not to move BB2121 to early line of therapy?
Yeah. So one thing I should say is that our relationship with Celgene has been, as you can see from the progress of the program, has been fantastic. Moving into not only KarMMa-1, the pivotal trial, which we've said is fully enrolled, but now in the first half of this year into KarMMa-2 and KarMMa-3, which are second and third line therapy trials, and the anticipation that we will be moving in with Celgene into a first line trial this year. So that's exciting. That excitement hasn't waned, and it's really driven by the unmet need for sure, but also the data that you've seen with regard to these patients that are, in particular in the relapsed refractory population, in need of something. So we and they continue to be pushing forward very aggressively on this expansive approach to the BB2121 and 21-21-7, which is the fast follow. As it relates to the BMS situation, the contract effectively is that Celgene would be replaced by BMS from a contractual perspective. And so nothing changes. And we're frankly pretty excited about working with BMS, who's publicly declared their interest in 21-21, and they've got obviously the CVR on this, so that shows certainly some significant value that they placed on that program. We haven't spoken to BMS because we cannot. However, all the public statements that you've heard gets us excited about working with BMS going forward. If it ends up back in Celgene's hands, well, I mean, we're equally excited. So I don't think that really matters to us. Your second question was about first line.
Yes.
All I can say is we have every intent to be in first line this year, and there is nothing that we see that has waned in Celgene or our eyes of moving forward with the first line. So I don't know if I can comment further about that.
That's fair enough. Very helpful. I think we're running out of time. Thank you very much, Jeff. We do have a breakout session in Ponciana 2.
Thank you.
Across the hall. Thank you.
Thanks.